tried to kick black kids out of the park, igniting a firestorm that divided an entire community. But what the mayor did next left everyone stunned. A decision that would either bring the city together or tear it apart forever. You won't believe the unexpected turn this story takes. Let's hear it. Where are you watching from and how's your day going? It was a perfect afternoon at Evergreen Park, the kind of day where the sun shone just right, casting a golden glow on the green lawns, the playground, and the families scattered across the area. Children's laughter filled the air, blending with the sounds of birds chirping and the distant jingle of an ice cream truck circling the neighborhood. Among the crowd, a group of black children played happily near the swings. They ran around, laughing and shouting in a game of tag, their joy a beacon of innocence and childhood freedom. Their parents, sitting on a nearby bench, watched over them with contentment, enjoying the warmth of the day and the sight of their children having fun. But not everyone shared their delight. Karen Simmons stood a little further away, her face twisted in a frown. She had lived in this neighborhood for years and considered the park her personal domain, a place where she felt entitled to decide who belonged. The sight of these children, laughing and playing without a care, irked her. She didn't like it. She didn't like them here. With a huff of indignation, Karen stormed toward the parents, her steps purposeful. When she reached them, her face was set in a scowl. "Excuse me," she said sharply, her voice dripping with condescension. "Are those your kids?" Shaniqua, one of the mothers, looked up calmly. "Yes, they are," she replied, her voice even but wary. Karen crossed her arms tightly. "Well, I don't think they should be playing here. They're being too loud and disruptive. This is a park for families, not for that kind of behavior." Shaniqua blinked, momentarily stunned by the audacity of the statement. "Excuse me?" she asked, keeping her voice controlled. "They're just playing. They have every right to be here, just like everyone else." Karen's face tightened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Well, if you can't keep them under control, I'll have no choice but to call the police. This is unacceptable behavior in a public space." Shaniqua stood up, her body tensing. "They're doing nothing wrong," she said, her voice firm. "And calling the police, for what? Playing?" Karen's hand was already reaching for her phone. "Yes, I'm going to call them," she snapped. "It's my duty to ensure this park stays a peaceful place." As Karen began dialing, the parents exchanged uneasy glances. They had seen situations like this escalate before, and they knew all too well how quickly things could turn from a peaceful day at the park to something much darker. David, Shaniqua's husband, stepped in. His voice was calm but firm. "There's no need for this. The kids are just having fun like everyone else. Why escalate things?" But Karen wasn't backing down. She raised her voice as she spoke into the phone. "Yes, police. I'm at Evergreen Park and there's a group of kids here causing a disturbance. They're being loud and disruptive." The tension in the air thickened as the parents gathered closer to their children, their faces growing tight with worry. Some of the other park-goers began to take notice, whispering among themselves or pulling out their phones to record what was happening. The minutes dragged by, and in the distance the unmistakable sound of sirens pierced the air. The children, who had stopped playing by now, huddled closer to their parents, their innocent laughter replaced with confused silence. The police car pulled up to the curb, and 2 officers stepped out. Karen was the first to approach them, her voice filled with a self-satisfied tone. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said, gesturing toward the group of parents. "These kids have been causing a disturbance, and their parents refuse to do anything about it. I think it's best if they are removed." The officers glanced at the parents and their children. One officer, who seemed more measured, approached slowly. "Let's all calm down," he said. "What's going on here?" Before Shaniqua could explain, another voice cut through the crowd. "What's happening here?" All heads turned as the mayor, accompanied by a few aides, walked briskly into the park. His expression was serious, and he scanned the scene with a determined look in his eyes. The entire park fell silent, waiting for what would happen next. Mayor Thomas Jackson was a man known for his progressive policies and his dedication to the community. He had grown up in this very neighborhood, playing in the same parks and walking the same streets. For him, this wasn't just a job, it was personal. When he had first heard about the incident unfolding at Evergreen Park, he knew he had to see it for himself. This wasn't just about a few kids playing too loudly. It was about something much deeper, something that touched the core of what he believed his city should represent. He made his way through the gathering crowd, his eyes taking in the tense faces of the parents, the confused expressions on the children, and the self-satisfied look on Karen's face. He felt a knot of anger tighten in his chest, but he kept his expression calm. This was a moment that required not just authority, but empathy and understanding. "Good afternoon," Mayor Jackson began, his voice calm but firm. "I'm Mayor Jackson. I understand there's been a complaint." Karen, sensing an opportunity to gain favor, stepped forward eagerly. "Yes, Mayor Jackson, thank you for coming," she said, her tone shifting to one of false politeness. "These children have been causing a disruption, and their parents refuse to control them. This is a family park, and we can't have this kind of behavior." The mayor's gaze shifted to the children, who were now clustered around their parents, their small faces filled with confusion and fear. He felt a wave of sadness wash over him. These were just kids, out enjoying a sunny afternoon, and now they were being treated as if they had done something wrong simply for existing in a space meant for everyone. "I see," Mayor Jackson said, his voice measured. "And what exactly were they doing that was so disruptive?" Karen hesitated, taken aback by the mayor's calm but direct question. "Well, they were being loud and running around. It was disruptive to others who are trying to enjoy the park." The mayor raised an eyebrow. "So they were being children?" There was a ripple of laughter from the crowd, a few people nodding in agreement. Karen's face flushed with embarrassment, but she pressed on, unwilling to back down. "But it's the way they were behaving. It's just not appropriate." The mayor turned his attention to the parents. "Is that true? Were your children misbehaving?" Shaniqua stepped forward, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of frustration. "No, Mayor. They were just playing like they do every other weekend. We come here all the time, they're good kids." The mayor nodded thoughtfully. He could see the fear in the parents' eyes, the way they stood protectively around their children, as if bracing themselves for whatever might come next. It was a stance he recognized, one that spoke of a lifetime of being on guard, of being prepared for the worst, even in the most innocent of situations. He turned back to Karen. "I appreciate your concern for the park, ma'am, but I see no reason why these children should not be allowed to play here, like any other kids. This is a public space, and it belongs to everyone." Karen's face turned a shade darker. "But Mayor, they are doing nothing wrong," Mayor Jackson interrupted gently but firmly. "They are just enjoying the park like anyone else. I don't see any reason to escalate this further." The officers, who had been standing by, glanced at each other, then back at Karen, as if waiting for her to push the issue further. But Karen, now flustered and without any more reasonable arguments, merely sputtered. But what about the rules?" The mayor sighed inwardly. He knew that this was about more than just rules. It was about a mindset, a sense of ownership that some people felt over places and spaces, an unspoken belief that certain people didn't belong. He had faced it himself growing up, and had spent his career trying to change that very narrative. "The rules are the same for everyone, ma'am," he said, his tone now edged with steel. "And as long as those rules are being followed, everyone is welcome here. Everyone." Karen's face crumpled in a mixture of frustration and defeat. She looked around, hoping for support from the crowd, but found none. The parents watched her with wary eyes. The bystanders remained silent, and even the police officers seemed to be waiting to see what she would do next. For a moment it seemed like she might continue her protest, but then with a huff, she turned on her heel and marched off, muttering under her breath. The mayor watched her go, then turned back to the parents and the children. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said sincerely. "You have every right to be here, and I'll make sure nothing like this happens again." Shaniqua stepped forward, her eyes glistening with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Mayor. We just want our kids to feel safe and welcome. That's all." Mayor Jackson nodded. "That's all anyone wants, and I promise we're going to do more than just talk about it. We're going to make sure it happens." As he spoke, the tension in the air seemed to lift slightly. The parents' shoulders relaxed a little, and the children, sensing that the immediate danger had passed, began to smile again. The mayor took a moment to speak with each family, listening to their concerns, offering reassurances. He knew that his words alone weren't enough, but they were a start. After a while, the crowd began to disperse. The officers, seeing that the situation had de-escalated, offered nods of respect to the mayor and left. The parents slowly resumed their seats, their eyes still watchful but less guarded. The children, still a little hesitant, began to resume their play, their laughter gradually returning as they chased each other around the playground once more. Mayor Jackson stood for a moment watching them, a thoughtful look on his face. He had come here to prevent a situation from spiraling out of control, but he knew that what he had witnessed was just a symptom of a much deeper problem. It wasn't enough to diffuse these incidents one by one. Something had to change, fundamentally, in the way people thought and behaved. With a final nod to the parents, he turned and walked back toward his car, his mind already racing with ideas. He would call an emergency meeting at City Hall, gather his advisors, and start working on a plan. This wasn't just about Evergreen Park. This was about the entire city, about making sure everyone felt welcome and safe, no matter who they were or where they came from. And with that he left the park, determined to turn this incident into the beginning of something much bigger. Despite the mayor's intervention and assurance, the incident at Evergreen Park didn't end there. As the evening wore on, the story began to spread. A few people who had recorded the confrontation posted the videos online. Within hours, social media was ablaze with debates and heated discussions. The hashtags Dr. Evergreen Park Incident and Year Let Them Play started trending, drawing attention from people far beyond the boundaries of the small town. The videos showed snippets of the altercation, Karen's confrontation, her call to the police, and the mayor's intervention. But as with any viral event, the interpretations varied wildly. Some saw it as a clear case of racism, an attempt to police black bodies in public spaces. Others tried to downplay it, claiming that Karen was just looking out for the peace and quiet of the park. But it was the footage of the children's scared faces, huddled close to their parents, that struck a chord with most viewers. For them, this wasn't just about a woman overreacting. It was about children being made to feel unsafe in their own community. As night fell, the story made its way to the local news. Reporters arrived at the park, interviewing anyone who had been present. The parents, still shaken by the experience, spoke with guarded words, their voices steady, but eyes revealing the hurt and anger they felt. The videos played on a loop, and soon, larger media outlets picked up the story. By morning, it was national news. Karen Simmons, who had gone home after her public scolding, was shocked by the attention the incident had garnered. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages and calls, some in support, but many more condemning her actions. Her social media accounts were flooded with comments, some filled with rage, others with support, but all contributing to the growing controversy. She had never imagined that what she saw as a simple act of protecting the park would explode into such a public spectacle. Determined to defend her actions, Karen decided to speak out. She called a local reporter and agreed to an interview, thinking it would give her a chance to explain her side of the story. As the cameras rolled, she sat stiffly in her living room, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I just wanted to make sure everyone could enjoy the park," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "It's not about race, it's about behavior. Those kids were being loud, and I felt it was necessary to do something." The interview aired that evening, and the backlash was immediate. Viewers were appalled by her lack of remorse and her insistence that it wasn't about race, despite all evidence to the contrary. Social media exploded once again, and the hashtags morphed into #KarenSimmons and #KickOutRacism. The narrative had shifted, and now Karen found herself at the center of a firestorm she hadn't anticipated and couldn't control. Meanwhile, at City Hall, Mayor Jackson was grappling with the fallout. He had known the incident was significant, but he hadn't expected it to gain this much traction, this quickly. His office was inundated with calls, emails, and messages from concerned citizens, both supporting and criticizing his handling of the situation. Some praised him for standing up for the children, while others accused him of overstepping, of pandering to the media, and of escalating a minor dispute into a full-blown crisis. Sitting in his office, the mayor reviewed the news reports, his expression growing more serious by the minute. He knew that this incident had tapped into a much deeper issue within the community, an issue of racial division, of unspoken prejudices, and of who was seen as belonging in public spaces. It wasn't enough to have diffused the situation in the park. This required a much bigger response. He called a meeting with his closest advisors, his voice firm as he laid out his plan. "We can't just let this die down," he said, his eyes blazing with determination. "This isn't just about those kids in the park. It's about every person in this city who has felt marginalized, unwelcome, or unsafe. We need to show them that this city belongs to everyone." His advisors nodded, scribbling notes as the mayor outlined his ideas. He proposed a series of community events aimed at promoting inclusivity and unity, starting with a Day of Community at Evergreen Park. It would be an event where people from all walks of life could come together, enjoy the park, and participate in activities designed to foster understanding and connection. There would be food, music, and games for the children, as well as open forums where people could share their experiences and ideas for making the community a more welcoming place. But the mayor knew that wouldn't be enough. He needed to address the systemic issues that had led to this incident in the first place. He proposed the formation of a new committee on diversity and inclusion, tasked with reviewing city policies, public spaces, and events to ensure that everyone felt welcome and safe. He also planned to introduce new training programs for city employees, including the police, on bias and inclusion. As he spoke, his advisors exchanged glances. It was an ambitious plan, one that would require significant resources and political capital. But the mayor was undeterred. He knew that this was his moment to make a real difference, to turn a painful incident into a catalyst for change. Over the next few days, the mayor's office worked tirelessly to put the plan into action. Flyers for the Day of Community went up around town, and local businesses offered their support, providing food and entertainment for the event. The media picked up on the story, and soon the narrative began to shift. The focus moved from the incident itself to the mayor's response and the community's efforts to come together in its aftermath. But not everyone was on board. A group of local residents, angered by what they saw as the mayor's pandering to the media and to certain communities, organized their own protest. They gathered outside City Hall, holding signs that read, "Stop the division," and "All lives matter." They accused the mayor of turning a simple misunderstanding into a political stunt, of creating division where there was none. The protest, though small, attracted the attention of the media, and soon both sides of the debate were being covered. The tension in the community was palpable, with people feeling more divided than ever. The mayor watched the news reports with a heavy heart. He had known this would be a challenge, but seeing the anger and hostility on display was disheartening. Still, he refused to back down. The Day of Community would go on, and he would be there, standing with the families who had been affected, showing his support for the kind of city he believed they could be, a city where everyone belonged. As the day of the event approached, the atmosphere in the city was tense. People weren't sure what to expect. Would the event bring people together, or would it deepen the divisions that had been exposed by the incident at the park? On the morning of the event, Mayor Jackson stood in his office, looking out over the city he had grown up in, the city he loved. He knew that whatever happened today would be a turning point. He took a deep breath and turned to his team. "Let's make this day count," he said quietly. And with that, they headed to Evergreen Park, hoping that this small effort could start to heal the wounds that had been laid bare. The morning of the Day of Community dawned bright and clear, but beneath the beautiful weather lay an undercurrent of tension that everyone could feel. Evergreen Park, the very place where the conflict had begun, was now bustling with activity. City workers were setting up tents, tables, and chairs. Local vendors were arranging food stands, and volunteers were preparing activities for the children. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, as if everyone was waiting to see whether this effort would be a success or a disaster. Mayor Jackson arrived early, his expression serious as he surveyed the scene. He had spent the past few days immersed in preparations, coordinating with community leaders, local businesses, and city officials to ensure everything would go smoothly. He knew that this event was more than just a show of goodwill. It was a chance to start a conversation, to begin healing the rift that had been exposed by the incident at the park. As people began to arrive, the mayor made his way to the main tent where a stage had been set up. He took a deep breath, glancing out at the growing crowd. It was a diverse mix of people, families, community leaders, students, and older residents. He could see the parents from the incident, their children laughing and playing nearby, though their eyes still held a hint of caution. He also noticed a few familiar faces from the protest that had taken place outside City Hall. They stood off to the side, their expressions skeptical, arms crossed over their chests. The mayor knew he had his work cut out for him. This wasn't just about making a speech or organizing an event. It was about changing hearts and minds, about convincing people that they could come together as a community, even when it seemed like the divides were too deep to bridge. He stepped up to the microphone, tapping it lightly to get everyone's attention. The crowd gradually quieted, all eyes turning toward him. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice steady and calm. "Thank you all for being here today. I know that recent events have left many of us feeling hurt, angry, and divided, but I believe that today we have an opportunity to start healing those wounds." There was a murmur of agreement from some, though others remained silent, their expressions guarded. The mayor pressed on. "Evergreen Park is a place where we should all feel welcome, where our children can play without fear, and where our families can come together in peace. The incident that happened here was painful, but it has also shown us how much work we still have to do to create the kind of community we all want to live in." He paused, letting his words sink in. Today is not just about enjoying the park. It's about listening to each other, understanding each other, and finding a way forward together. That's why we've organized this event, to bring people together and to show that we are stronger as a community when we stand united. The crowd was quiet now, listening intently. Mayor Jackson felt a surge of hope. Maybe this could work. Maybe this could be the start of something positive. For the rest of the day, we have activities for the kids, food and music for everyone to enjoy. And most importantly, we have spaces set up for open dialogue. I encourage all of you to take part in these discussions, to share your thoughts and listen to your neighbors. We can't change what happened, but we can decide how we move forward from here. With that, he stepped back, and the crowd erupted into applause. It wasn't the loudest applause he had ever heard, but it was sincere, and that was what mattered. As he left the stage, he was immediately surrounded by people wanting to talk to him, parents thanking him for his support, local business owners offering their assistance, and community leaders wanting to discuss next steps. He listened to them all, his mind racing with ideas and plans. As the day went on, the atmosphere in the park began to shift. The initial tension gave way to cautious optimism. People started to mingle, joining in the games and activities, sampling food from the various stands, and most importantly, talking to each other. The discussions in the dialogue tents were intense at times, but they were also honest and heartfelt. People shared their experiences, their fears, and their hopes for the community. Mayor Jackson made a point of visiting each tent, listening to the conversations and adding his own thoughts when appropriate. In one tent, a group of teenagers spoke about their experiences with racism and discrimination, their voices filled with a mix of anger and determination. In another, A group of older residents talked about how the neighborhood had changed over the years, their nostalgia tinged with concern about the future. The mayor was struck by the range of emotions and perspectives, but he was also inspired by the willingness of people to engage, to confront difficult truths, and to seek common ground. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of tension, but there was also a sense of possibility, of people coming together in a way they hadn't before. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, the mayor took a moment to step back and take it all in. The day had been a success, at least on the surface. People had come, they had talked, and they had shared their experiences. But he knew that this was just the beginning. Real change would take time, effort, and a sustained commitment from everyone involved. He made his way over to the group of parents from the initial incident who were sitting together on a bench, watching their children play. Shaniqua looked up as he approached, a small smile on her face. "Thank you, Mayor," she said softly. "For today. For everything." Mayor Jackson shook his head. "I should be thanking you," he said. "You've shown incredible strength and courage through all of this. Today is just a small step, but I'm committed to making sure that what happened to your kids never happens again." The parents nodded, their expressions serious. They knew, as did the mayor, that this wasn't over. But there was a sense of hope now, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. As the event wound down and people began to head home, Mayor Jackson stood near the entrance of the park, shaking hands and thanking people for coming. His heart felt lighter than it had in days. The road ahead was long, and there would be setbacks, but today had been a good start. When the park was nearly empty, he took one last look around, then turned and walked back to his car. He was exhausted, but his mind was already working on the next steps. There was so much to do, and he was determined to see it through. As Mayor Jackson drove home from the Day of Community event, his thoughts drifted back to his own childhood. He had grown up in this very neighborhood, and Evergreen Park had been a constant in his life, a place of joy and solace during his formative years. But it had not always been the welcoming place he had envisioned today. The park, much like the city itself, had a complex history, a history that still cast long shadows over the present. He remembered the stories his parents used to tell him, about how they had moved to the city in the late 1960s, fleeing the deep-seated racism of the rural South. They had come here hoping for a better life, a place where they could raise their children in peace. But even here, in this seemingly progressive city, they had faced their own set of challenges. Mayor Jackson's father had been a proud man, a factory worker who took immense pride in his job and his family. He would often tell stories of how, despite his hard work, he was passed over for promotions time and again, in favor of less qualified white colleagues. It was a pattern that repeated itself in every facet of their lives. There were unspoken rules about where they could live, where they could shop, and even where they could relax. And the park, Evergreen Park, had been one of those places. When Mayor Jackson was just a boy, his father had taken him to the park for the first time. He could still recall the excitement he had felt as they drove down the street, his small hands gripping the car door, eager to see what awaited him. But when they arrived, they found a different scene. The park was filled with families, all of them white, and the stares that greeted them were anything but welcoming. His father had hesitated at the entrance, looking around before finally deciding to go in. He had held his son's hand tightly as they walked through the park, his eyes scanning the faces around them, looking for any sign of trouble. Mayor Jackson, just a child then, had sensed his father's unease, but didn't understand it. To him, it was just a park, a place to run and play. But to his father, it was a test of whether they could be accepted, whether they belonged. The discomfort of that day had lingered in the air like a bad smell. They had only stayed for a short while, leaving long before Jackson had had his fill of play. Later, his father had explained it to him in hushed tones. "It's not that we're not allowed, Tommy," he had said, his voice heavy with resignation. "It's that some folks don't want us here. They think this place is theirs, and that we don't belong." Those words had stuck with Jackson. even as he grew older and began to see the world more clearly. He had understood then that the issue wasn't the law or the rules of the park, but the attitudes and prejudices that permeated every corner of society. He had seen it in school, where he and a handful of other black students were always expected to work twice as hard to prove themselves. He had seen it when his father was denied a promotion yet again, and his mother had to take on extra work to make ends meet. As he grew older, Jackson became more determined to challenge those unspoken rules. He became active in student government, fighting for equal representation and the right to be heard. He studied hard, earning a scholarship to college, and returned to his city with a law degree and a fire in his belly to make things better. He had run for city council in his late 20s, pushing for reforms that would open up opportunities for everyone, regardless of their background. And when he became mayor, he had made it his mission to ensure that no one else had to feel like an outsider in their own community. But the incident at Evergreen Park had shaken him. It was a painful reminder that the progress they had made was fragile, that the old wounds could still be reopened with just a few harsh words and a phone call to the police. He couldn't help but think of his father, long past now, and wonder what he would have thought of today. Would he have been proud of the way his son had handled the situation, or would he have been disheartened to see that things hadn't changed as much as they should have? As he pulled into his driveway, the memories continued to swirl in his mind. He thought of the marches he had joined as a young man, the signs they had carried demanding justice and equality. He remembered the fire hoses and police dogs used to break up those protests, the feeling of fear and anger as they stood their ground, demanding to be heard. Those had been hard days, but they had also been days of solidarity and hope, days when it felt like they were on the brink of real change. But change, he had learned, was never straightforward. It came in fits and starts, with victories and setbacks. And sometimes it came so slowly that it was hard to see if it was happening at all. He thought about the kids at the park, their frightened faces as they watched the police arrive. How many times had those same expressions been seen over the decades, as different generations of children were made to feel like they didn't belong? He sighed deeply, the weight of it all pressing down on him. But as he sat there in his car, a new resolve began to form. The day of community had been a start, but it wasn't enough. He had to do more, had to push harder, to make sure that the city truly lived up to its promise of equality and inclusion. He owed it to his father, to his younger self, and to every child who just wanted to play in the park without fear. The next morning, he called a meeting with his staff. He laid out his plans for the new Committee on Diversity and Inclusion, the training programs for city employees, and the community forums that would be held across the city. He knew it would be difficult, that there would be resistance, but he also knew it was necessary. "We're not just reacting to an incident," he told his team, his voice firm and clear. "We're setting the foundation for the kind of city we want to be, a city where everyone is welcome, where everyone belongs. This is our chance to do something real, something lasting." As he spoke, he could see the determination in the faces of his team, the same determination that had driven him all these years. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight. But he knew that they had to try. For his father, for the children at the park, and for every person who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. And so, they got to work. In the days following the Day of Community, Mayor Jackson's office was a whirlwind of activity. The event had sparked a renewed sense of hope and determination among many in the community, but it had also exposed deep divisions that could not be ignored. Emails and phone calls flooded in, some from residents offering support, others from people outraged by what they perceived as the mayor's favoritism and political grandstanding. The mayor knew he had stirred up a hornet's nest, but he also knew that real change was rarely comfortable. Despite the mixed reactions, he remained steadfast in his commitment to move forward with the initiatives he had announced. The newly formed Committee on Diversity and Inclusion was set to hold its first meeting, and the mayor planned to attend, hoping to set the tone for the work that lay ahead. He wanted to make it clear that this was not just a symbolic gesture, it was a serious effort to address the issues that had come to light in the wake of the park incident. The day of the committee meeting arrived, and City Hall was buzzing with anticipation. Reporters gathered outside, eager for any news. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The mayor's staff had worked tirelessly to prepare for this moment, and the room was filled with community leaders, activists, and representatives from various organizations. There was a palpable sense of urgency in the air, as if everyone present knew that this was a crucial moment for the city. Mayor Jackson arrived early, taking a moment to greet each committee member personally. He could see the determination in their eyes, but also the weight of the responsibility they felt. This wasn't just another meeting. It was a chance to shape the future of the city, to lay the groundwork for real, meaningful change. As the meeting got underway, the mayor took his seat at the head of the table. He looked around at the faces before him, people from different backgrounds, with different perspectives, but all united by a common goal. He cleared his throat and began to speak. "Thank you all for being here today," he said, his voice steady. "The events of the past few weeks have shown us that we have a lot of work to do to make this city the inclusive, welcoming place we all want it to be. This committee is not just about responding to what happened at Evergreen Park. It's about addressing the systemic issues that have been festering in our community for far too long." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We have an opportunity here to do something real, something that will make a lasting impact, but we can't do it alone. We need the support and input of the entire community, and we need to be willing to have difficult conversations, to face uncomfortable truths." As he continued, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The committee members nodded in agreement, their expressions serious and focused. They discussed plans for a series of town hall meetings across the city, where residents could share their experiences and ideas. They talked about creating new programs in schools to teach children about diversity and inclusion, and about working with local businesses to ensure that everyone in the community felt welcome and valued. The meeting lasted for hours, and by the time it ended, there was a sense of cautious optimism in the room. The mayor felt a glimmer of hope. It would be a long road, but they were on their way. But as the committee members began to leave, the mayor's aide hurried over to him, a worried look on her face. "Mayor Jackson, you should see this," she said, handing him her phone. He glanced at the screen and felt his heart sink. A group of residents had gathered outside City Hall, holding signs and chanting. The protest, which had been simmering online, had now erupted into a full-blown demonstration. The mayor handed the phone back to his aide, his jaw tightening. He had known this was coming, but it was still disheartening to see. The signs were clear: "Stop dividing our city. All lives matter. No more political games." The protesters were angry, and they were demanding to be heard. He took a deep breath and turned to his staff. "I'm going out there," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" one of his advisors asked, worry etched across his face. The mayor nodded. "We can't ignore them. They have a right to be heard, too." He made his way to the front entrance of City Hall, his heart pounding. As he stepped outside, the crowd fell silent for a moment, then erupted into a chorus of boos and shouts. The air was thick with tension, the energy of the crowd pulsing like a living thing. Mayor Jackson raised his hands, signaling for silence. It took a few moments, but gradually the crowd quieted down, though the hostility in their eyes was still palpable. "Thank you for coming out today," he began, his voice carrying over the crowd. "I understand that many of you are frustrated and angry. You feel like your voices aren't being heard, and that's why I'm here, to listen." A man near the front of the crowd stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "This isn't about listening," he shouted. "This is about you dividing our city. You're playing politics with our lives." There was a murmur of agreement from the crowd, and the mayor nodded slowly. "I hear you," he said, "and I want you to know that this isn't about politics. It's about making sure that everyone in this city feels safe and welcome." "But what about us?" a woman called out. "What about the people who've lived here all their lives, who've built this community? We feel like we're being pushed aside." The mayor felt a pang of sympathy. He knew that change could be unsettling, that people who had lived in the community for years felt like their way of life was being threatened. But he also knew that those fears couldn't justify discrimination or exclusion. "I understand your concerns," he said, his voice steady. "But this city belongs to all of us. We can't move forward by excluding people or pushing them aside. We have to find a way to come together, to build a community where everyone feels like they belong." The crowd muttered, some people nodding, others shaking their heads. The mayor continued, his voice rising above the murmurs. "I'm not asking you to change who you are or to forget where we've come from. I'm asking you to open your hearts and minds to the possibility that we can be better, that we can be stronger together." There was a long, tense silence as the crowd considered his words. The mayor felt his heart pounding in his chest, but he stood his ground, his gaze steady. Finally, a voice called out from the back of the crowd, "How do we know this isn't just another empty promise?" The mayor turned toward the voice, his expression earnest. "Because I'm here, right now, talking to you. Because I've spent my life fighting for this community, and I'm not going to stop now. I know it's going to take more than words, and that's why I'm committed to working with all of you, to listening to your concerns, and to finding solutions together." There was a ripple of conversation through the crowd, the anger and hostility softening just a bit. The mayor knew it wasn't enough to change everyone's minds, but it was a start. He took a deep breath and continued. "We're going to be holding town hall meetings across the city in the coming weeks," he said. "I want all of you to come, to share your thoughts, your concerns, your ideas. This is your city, and you deserve to have a say in its future." With that, he stepped back, his heart still pounding, but his resolve unshaken. The crowd remained, some people still shouting their frustrations, but others seemed to be considering his words. It wasn't the resolution he had hoped for, but it was something. A step toward dialogue, toward understanding. As he turned to go back inside, one of his aides met him at the door. "That was brave, sir," she said quietly, "but this is going to be a tough fight." The mayor nodded, his face set in determination. "I know, but it's a fight worth having." In the days following the confrontation at City Hall, Mayor Jackson found himself at the center of a growing storm. The protest outside had been just the beginning. News outlets, both local and national, picked up the story, portraying the city as a microcosm of the broader social tensions gripping the country. Some commentators praised the mayor's efforts to address the deep-seated issues of racism and exclusion, while others accused him of stoking division and playing politics. The pressure was immense. Every move he made was scrutinized, every statement dissected and debated. His team was exhausted, working around the clock to manage the fallout and to keep the city functioning smoothly amidst the turmoil. The mayor himself felt the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him, but he refused to back down. He knew that this was a pivotal moment, not just for his administration, but for the entire city. It was during one of these late-night strategy meetings, the clock ticking past midnight, that the mayor made a decision that would shock everyone. "We need to do something bold," he said, looking around the room at his tired but determined team. "Something that shows we're serious about change, that we're not just talking about it, but that we're willing to take real action." His advisors exchanged wary glances. They had been through a lot in the past few weeks, and the idea of doing something even more controversial seemed risky, maybe even reckless. But the mayor's eyes were blazing with conviction, and they knew better than to try to dissuade him when he was in this mood. "What do you have in mind, sir?" his chief of staff asked cautiously. The mayor leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "We're going to rename Evergreen Park." A stunned silence filled the room. The park, a staple of the community for decades, was named after a prominent local figure from the city's past. Changing its name would be a bold, even radical move, one that would undoubtedly provoke strong reactions from all sides. "Sir," another advisor ventured hesitantly, "renaming the park is going to be incredibly controversial. It's going to upset a lot of people, especially those who see it as a part of their history." The mayor nodded. "I know, but that history isn't what it seems. The man it's named after, Daniel Evergreen, was a segregationist. He actively worked to keep black families out of this neighborhood back in the day. That's not the kind of history we should be honoring." There was a murmur of agreement from some, while others still looked uncertain. The mayor pressed on. "This park has been a symbol of exclusion for too long. It's time we changed that. I want to rename it something that reflects the values we're fighting for, something that represents inclusion and community." "But what name would you propose?" his chief of staff asked, still looking skeptical. The mayor leaned back, a thoughtful expression on his face. "We'll open it up to the community. We'll hold a citywide contest to rename the park, let people submit their ideas and vote on the best one. This way, it's not just my decision, it's something the whole city can be a part of." There was a pause as his team absorbed the idea. It was risky, yes, but it was also brilliant. It would shift the narrative, involve the community, and show that the mayor was serious about making lasting changes. "I think it could work," one of his advisors said slowly. "It would definitely get people talking, and it would give us a chance to highlight the kind of city we want to be." The mayor nodded. "Exactly. We need to move forward, to show that we're not just reacting to what happened, but that we're actively building a better future." The room buzzed with renewed energy as the team began to discuss the logistics of the plan. They talked about how to announce the contest, how to collect and vet the submissions, and how to ensure that the process was transparent and fair. By the end of the night, they had a solid plan in place, and the mood in the room had shifted from exhaustion to cautious optimism. The next day, Mayor Jackson held a press conference to announce the decision. He stood at the podium, cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions, but he remained calm and focused. "Today, I'm announcing a new initiative to rename Evergreen Park," he began, his voice steady and clear. "This park has been a part of our community for decades, but its history is one that many of us cannot be proud of. It was named after a man who actively worked to keep people of color out of this neighborhood, and that is not a legacy we should honor." There was a murmur of surprise from the crowd. This was news to many, even to some of the city's longtime residents. "We're going to change that," the mayor continued. "We're going to rename this park to reflect the values of inclusion, diversity, and community that we stand for. And we're not doing this alone. We're asking everyone in the city to participate. We want you to submit your ideas for a new name, and we'll hold a public vote to choose the one that best represents who we are and what we believe in." The reaction was immediate and intense. Some people applauded the decision, praising the mayor for his courage and vision. Others were outraged, accusing him of erasing history and pandering to political correctness. The media coverage was relentless, with pundits on all sides weighing in on the decision. But the mayor stood firm. He spent the next few days meeting with community leaders, explaining his decision, and encouraging people to participate in the contest. He visited schools, talking to students about the importance of understanding and honoring history, but also about the need to shape the future. He met with older residents, many of whom were initially resistant to the idea, and listened to their concerns with patience and respect. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Submissions for the park's new name poured in from all corners of the city. People suggested names that honored local heroes, names that reflected the natural beauty of the park, and names that celebrated the city's diversity. The mayor's office set up a website where people could view the submissions and vote for their favorites. The city buzzed with excitement and debate as people discussed the names and what they represented. As the voting period came to a close, one name emerged as the clear favorite: Unity Park. It was simple, but powerful. It captured the essence of what the mayor had been striving for: a place where everyone felt welcome, a symbol of a community coming together despite its differences. Mayor Jackson announced the winning name at a special ceremony in the park. He stood on the same stage where he had spoken just days before, but the atmosphere was completely different. The park was filled with people, families, students, elders, all gathered to witness this historic moment. "Today we are taking the first step in building a new future," the mayor said, his voice filled with emotion. "Unity Park will stand as a symbol of our commitment to each other, a place where everyone is welcome and where we can come together as one community." The crowd erupted into applause, and for the first time in weeks, the mayor felt a sense of real hope. This was more than just a new name for a park. It was a new chapter for the city, a chance to leave behind the pain of the past and build something better. As he stood there, looking out at the smiling faces before him, he knew that the road ahead would still be difficult. There would be more challenges, more resistance, but he also knew that they had taken an important step forward. The journey toward true unity was far from over, but today they had made a start. The renaming of Evergreen Park to Unity Park sent shockwaves throughout the city and beyond. While many celebrated the change as a bold step toward a more inclusive future, others saw it as an affront to their heritage and an erasure of the city's history. The divide was stark, and the reactions were intense. For those who supported the change, the new name represented hope, progress, and the promise of a better tomorrow. Social media was flooded with messages of support and gratitude. People shared their own stories of feeling excluded or unwelcome in certain spaces, and how the renaming of the park made them feel seen and valued. Parents posted pictures of their children playing in Unity Park, using hashtags like #Unity for All and #New Beginnings. Community leaders and activists who had been pushing for change were jubilant. They held rallies and events in the newly named park, celebrating the victory and using the momentum to call for further reforms in the city. For them, this was more than just a name change. It was a symbol of the power of collective action, proof that their voices mattered. But the backlash was equally fierce. A vocal group of residents, who felt the renaming was a betrayal of their heritage, organized their own protests. They gathered outside City Hall, waving signs that read, "Stop erasing our history and respect our heritage." They accused Mayor Jackson of pandering to political correctness and ignoring the will of the people. Local talk radio stations buzzed with heated debates, with callers on both sides passionately defending their positions. Some expressed their outrage at the change, arguing that the mayor was overstepping his bounds and catering to a minority at the expense of the majority. They called for his resignation, vowing to vote him out of office in the next election. Others defended the decision, arguing that it was time to confront the city's past and move forward with a more inclusive vision. They pointed out that honoring a segregationist like Daniel Evergreen was not something to be proud of, and that the city needed to reflect the values of all its residents, not just a select few. The controversy spilled over into the city council meetings, which became battlegrounds for the debate. Council members were inundated with calls and emails from constituents, demanding that they take a stand on the issue. Some council members, sensing the political danger, tried to distance themselves from the decision, while others, emboldened by the mayor's stance, publicly supported the change. Mayor Jackson found himself in the crosshairs. He received death threats, his family was harassed, and his every move was scrutinized by the media. But through it all, he remained resolute. He knew that the decision to rename the park was the right one, and he refused to back down, even as the pressure mounted. One evening, a few weeks after the renaming, the mayor received a call from his mother. She had been following the news closely, and although she was proud of her son, she was also worried. "Thomas," she said softly, her voice filled with concern, "I'm worried about you. You're under so much pressure. Are you sure this is worth it?" The mayor sighed, leaning back in his chair. He was tired, more tired than he had ever been, but he knew he couldn't give up now. "I know it's hard, Mom," he replied gently, "but this is bigger than me. It's about doing what's right, even when it's difficult, even when people don't understand." His mother was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with a quiet pride. "I know, son. I just want you to be safe. Promise me you'll take care of yourself." "I promise," he said, smiling despite the weight on his shoulders. "And thank you for always believing in me." After he hung up, the mayor sat in the quiet of his office, thinking about everything that had happened. The decision to rename the park had been the most controversial of his career, but it had also been the most important. He knew that real change was never easy, and that there would always be people who resisted it. but he also knew that he couldn't let fear or backlash dictate his actions. The next day, the mayor decided to hold an open forum at Unity Park. He wanted to give everyone, both supporters and critics, a chance to voice their opinions and to hear from him directly. He knew it would be a difficult conversation, but he believed that it was necessary. The forum was held in the late afternoon, and by the time the mayor arrived, a large crowd had gathered. There were families with children, elderly residents, community leaders, and activists. But there were also protesters, their signs held high, their faces set in angry lines. Mayor Jackson took the stage, his heart pounding. He looked out at the sea of faces, the tension in the air almost palpable. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice steady. "I know that there are a lot of strong feelings about the decision to rename this park, and I want to hear from all of you, but I also want to take a moment to explain why I made this decision." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I believe that a community is defined by the values it chooses to honor, and I believe that we cannot move forward if we are still holding on to symbols of a painful past." Daniel Evergreen was a man who fought to keep people of color out of this neighborhood. That's not a history we should be proud of. Unity Park is not about erasing history. It's about creating a new history, one that includes all of us. A murmur ran through the crowd, and the mayor could see that his words were having an impact on some, but not all. One man stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "You talk about inclusion? But what about the people who've lived here for generations? What about our history?" The mayor nodded, his expression serious. "I understand your frustration. I know that change is hard, and that it can feel like we're losing something important. But we have to ask ourselves, what kind of history do we want to leave for our children? One that honors exclusion, or one that celebrates unity?" The man shook his head, but he didn't argue further. A woman stepped forward next, her eyes filled with tears. "My grandparents moved here because they couldn't find a home anywhere else. This park was the only place where they felt safe. How can you take that away?" Mayor Jackson's heart ached at her words. He stepped closer, his voice gentle. "I'm not taking that away. I'm trying to make sure that everyone can feel safe here, just like your grandparents did. I want this park to be a place where everyone belongs, where everyone is welcome." There were murmurs of agreement from the crowd, and the tension seemed to ease slightly. The mayor continued, answering questions, listening to concerns, and trying to bridge the gap between the two sides. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when he felt like he was walking a tightrope, but he kept going, his commitment unwavering. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, something remarkable happened. A small group of children, black, white, Latino, and Asian, ran up to the stage, their faces lit with excitement. They had been playing together in the park, oblivious to the heated discussions happening around them. One little girl, no older than 6, tugged on the mayor's pant leg, her eyes wide. "Mr. Mayor," she said, her voice clear and innocent, "we all decided we like the new name. It's better this way." Mayor Jackson looked down at the children, his heart swelling with emotion. He knelt down to their level, smiling. "Thank you," he said softly. "That means a lot to me." The crowd, watching this simple exchange, fell silent. And in that silence, something shifted. The anger and resentment that had filled the air seemed to dissipate, replaced by something gentler, something hopeful. The mayor knew that not everyone would change their mind, that some people would remain opposed to the decision. But he also knew that, in that moment, they had taken another small step toward healing. As the forum came to an end, people began to disperse, some still grumbling, but others with thoughtful expressions on their faces. Mayor Jackson stood at the entrance of the park, shaking hands and thanking people for coming. He felt exhausted, but also uplifted. A man approached him, one of the protesters who had been the most vocal in his opposition. He looked at the mayor for a long moment before finally speaking. "I still don't agree with you," he said quietly, "but I respect you for standing up for what you believe in." The mayor nodded, his eyes earnest. "I appreciate that, and I hope we can continue this conversation. I want to hear from you, and I want to find a way for all of us to move forward together." The man nodded slowly, then turned and walked away. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small crack in the wall of division that had built up over the years. As the mayor watched him go, he felt a sense of peace. This was what leadership was about. Not just making decisions, but standing by them, listening to the people you served, and finding a way forward, even when it seemed impossible. He turned back to the park, watching as the last few people lingered, talking quietly among themselves. The new sign, Unity Park, gleamed in the fading light, a symbol of the journey they were all on together. It wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more setbacks, but as the mayor stood there, he knew that they were on the right path, and that was enough for now. In the weeks following the emotional forum at Unity Park, the atmosphere in the city began to shift. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but there were small, noticeable changes, glimmers of hope that hinted at a new beginning. People were talking more openly about issues that had long been swept under the rug. The town hall meetings organized by the mayor's office were packed, with residents eager to share their experiences and listen to others. The newly formed Committee on Diversity and Inclusion worked tirelessly, gathering feedback from these meetings and proposing concrete changes to city policies. One of their first recommendations was to introduce mandatory bias training for all city employees, from the police department to the public works staff. It was a bold move, one that sparked heated debates in the city council, but ultimately, the measure passed. The training sessions began almost immediately, and while there was resistance from some quarters, the results were promising. People who had once been skeptical found themselves learning and growing, realizing how deeply ingrained biases could be and how they affected their interactions with others. The city government also launched a series of public awareness campaigns, encouraging residents to examine their own biases and to engage in open, respectful dialogue. Unity Park, once a symbol of division, became a focal point for the city's efforts toward healing and community building. Events were held almost every weekend, cultural festivals celebrating the city's diversity, community picnics, and outdoor concerts. Local businesses sponsored many of these events, eager to support the new vision for the city. One Saturday afternoon, the park was alive with activity. A multicultural food festival was in full swing, with booths lining the pathways, offering everything from soul food to Thai delicacies to traditional Mexican dishes. The air was filled with the sound of laughter and conversation, the sense of spices and freshly cooked meals. People of all backgrounds mingled together, sharing food and stories, their differences celebrated rather than feared. Mayor Jackson walked through the park, stopping at each booth to chat with the vendors and residents. He could feel the energy in the air, the sense of possibility. This was what he had envisioned, a city coming together, learning from each other, growing stronger in its diversity. As he made his way to the center of the park, he noticed Shaniqua and her family sitting under a large oak tree, enjoying plates of food. He approached them with a smile. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Of course not, Mayor," Shaniqua said warmly, shifting over to make room for him. Her children were playing nearby, their laughter filling the air. They seemed happier, more carefree, and it warmed the mayor's heart to see it. "I can't believe how much things have changed," Shaniqua said, looking around at the bustling park. "A few months ago, I wouldn't have felt comfortable bringing my kids here, but now it's different. It feels like we belong." The mayor nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "It's been a long road, and there's still a lot of work to do, but I'm glad to see things moving in the right direction." David, Shaniqua's husband, leaned forward. "What's next, Mayor? What else can we do to keep this momentum going?" Mayor Jackson smiled. "Well, we're working on a few new initiatives. We're expanding the community programs to include more activities for kids and teens, and we're planning to partner with local schools to create mentorship programs. We want to make sure that everyone, especially our young people, feels supported and valued." Shaniqua nodded, her expression serious. "That's good. It's so important for our kids to see positive examples, to know that they can achieve anything they set their minds to." The mayor agreed. Absolutely. And we're also looking at ways to improve economic opportunities in underrepresented communities. It's not just about changing attitudes, it's about creating real, tangible opportunities for everyone. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden cheer from the crowd. The mayor turned to see a group of children on stage performing a dance routine. They were from a local community center that had recently received funding from the city for arts programs. The crowd clapped and cheered as the kids, their faces beaming with pride, finished their performance. The mayor felt a swell of emotion as he watched. This was what it was all about, giving people the opportunity to shine, to be seen, to be celebrated. It wasn't just about a park or a name. It was about creating a community where everyone had a place, where everyone could thrive. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over the park, the mayor stood up to address the crowd. He walked to the stage, his heart full. The crowd fell silent as he took the microphone. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice carrying across the park. "Seeing all of you here, enjoying this beautiful day, celebrating our diverse community. It's everything I hoped for and more." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "We've been through a lot as a city. We've faced challenges, we've had difficult conversations, and we've made some tough decisions. But we've also come together in ways I never imagined. We've shown that we're willing to listen, to learn, and to grow." He took a deep breath, his eyes shining with emotion. "This is just the beginning. We have so much more to do, so many more opportunities to make this city a place where everyone feels they belong. And I'm committed to that work, just as I know all of you are." The crowd erupted into applause, and the mayor felt a surge of hope. This was what leadership was about. Not just making decisions, but inspiring people, bringing them together, helping them see what was possible. After his speech, he stepped down from the stage and mingled with the crowd. He shook hands, hugged old friends, and listened to people's ideas and concerns. He could feel the community's spirit, the sense that they were all in this together. As the evening wore on, and the festival began to wind down, the mayor found himself standing at the edge of the park, looking out at the scene before him. Families were packing up their picnic blankets, children were chasing each other across the grass, and groups of friends were gathered in animated conversation. The new sign, Unity Park, gleamed softly in the fading light, a reminder of how far they had come. But as he watched, he knew that the journey wasn't over. There were still challenges ahead, still people who felt left out, still issues that needed to be addressed. But for the first time in a long time, he felt truly hopeful. They had laid the foundation, and now it was time to build on it. He thought about the programs they were planning, the initiatives they were working on, the partnerships they were forging. He thought about the children he had seen today, their faces lit with joy and hope. This was why he had become mayor, not for the power or the recognition, but to make a difference, to help create a city where everyone could thrive. As he turned to leave, he caught sight of an older woman sitting on a bench, watching the scene with a thoughtful expression. He recognized her as one of the residents who had initially opposed the renaming of the park. He hesitated, then walked over to her. "Good evening," he said with a smile. "I'm glad you could make it today." She looked up at him, her eyes kind but wary. "I wasn't sure if I should come," she admitted. "I wasn't happy about the name change, but I wanted to see for myself what all the fuss was about." The mayor nodded, sitting down beside her. "And what do you think?" She was silent for a moment, watching the people around them. I think maybe I was wrong," she said softly. "I've lived here all my life, and I've never seen the park like this. People laughing, talking, coming together. Maybe this is what we needed." The mayor felt a lump in his throat. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot." She nodded, a small smile on her lips. "I don't know if I'll ever get used to the new name, but I think I understand now. It's not just about the name, is it?" "No," the mayor said gently. "It's about what the name represents. A new beginning, for all of us." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a lifetime of wisdom and experience. "You've got a tough job, young man, but I think you're doing it well. The mayor smiled, feeling a sense of peace. "Thank you. And thank you for being here. It means more than you know." They sat in silence for a moment, watching as the last few people left the park. The air was cool and still, the sky a deep shade of blue. It felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. As the mayor finally stood to leave, he felt a sense of clarity and purpose. The road ahead was long, and there would be more challenges, more setbacks. But today, he had seen what was possible. He had seen a glimpse of the city they could become. And he knew, without a doubt, that they would get there, together. The transformation of Unity Park became a symbol for the entire city, a testament to what could be achieved when people came together, willing to listen and learn from one another. It wasn't just about the name change, or even the community events that followed. It was about the shift in mindset, the willingness to confront difficult truths, and work toward a better future. Mayor Jackson found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. The incident at Evergreen Park, the protests, the difficult conversations, and the ultimate decision to rename the park. It had been a tumultuous time, filled with both pain and hope. But through it all, he had seen the best of his community. He had seen people who were willing to stand up for what was right, who were willing to change, to grow. He thought about the conversations he had had with residents, the stories they had shared, the fears and hopes they had expressed. He thought about the children playing in Unity Park, their laughter a reminder of what this was all about. They were the future, and it was up to him and all the city's leaders to ensure that they grew up in a community that valued them, that saw them, that celebrated them. But he also knew that the work was far from over. The city still faced challenges: economic inequality, racial tensions, divisions that ran deep. Unity Park was a start, but it was just one step on a long road. The real work lay in addressing the systemic issues that had led to the incident in the first place, in creating opportunities for all residents, in building a community where everyone felt they belonged. As he sat in his office, looking out over the city, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was why he had become mayor, why he had dedicated his life to public service. It wasn't about power or prestige. It was about making a difference, about helping to create a city that truly lived up to its promise of equality and justice for all. He picked up his pen and began to write. He wrote about the journey they had been on, the lessons they had learned, the challenges they had faced. He wrote about the people he had met, the stories they had shared. And as he wrote, he found himself thinking about the future, about what kind of city they could become, about the legacy they would leave for the next generation. When he finished, he looked over what he had written. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was a reflection of the journey they had been on and a vision for the journey still to come. He set the paper aside and stood, feeling a sense of peace. There was still so much to do, but he was ready. The city was ready. As he left his office and headed home, he felt a sense of hope. They had come so far, and they had done it together. There would be more challenges, more difficult days, but he knew, without a doubt, that they would face them together, because in the end, that was what community was all about: standing together, even when it was hard, even when it felt impossible. It was about believing in each other, believing in the future, and never giving up on the dream of a better tomorrow. And that, more than anything, was what Unity Park represented: a new beginning, a new hope, a promise of what was possible when people came together, united by a common purpose. As the mayor drove home, he thought about the sign at the entrance of the park, gleaming softly in the moonlight. Unity Park. It was more than just a name. It was a promise that they would keep no matter what, because they were stronger together, and together they could achieve anything. As the months passed, Unity Park continued to thrive, becoming a symbol of the city's resilience and commitment to change. It was a place where the community gathered to celebrate, to learn, and to heal. Mayor Jackson often found himself visiting the park, not just for official events, but to reflect on everything that had transpired since that fateful day. Walking along the winding paths, he would see children playing, families enjoying picnics, and people from all walks of life coming together. It was a living testament to the power of unity, a reminder that even the deepest divisions could be bridged with understanding, empathy, and a shared vision for the future. But it wasn't just about the park. The changes that had begun there were spreading throughout the city. The town hall meetings continued to be well attended, with residents engaging in honest, sometimes difficult conversations about race, inclusion, and the future of their community. The new policies and programs implemented by the Committee on Diversity and Inclusion were beginning to bear fruit, creating more opportunities for dialogue and growth. Mayor Jackson knew that there was still much work to be done. The road ahead would be long, and there would be setbacks. But the progress they had made gave him hope. He had seen firsthand what could be achieved when people came together with a shared purpose, when they chose to listen and to learn from one another. He thought about the journey that had brought them here, the incident at the park, the protests, the difficult decisions, and the moments of doubt. There had been times when he had questioned whether it was all worth it, whether the fight for change was too difficult, too costly. But then he would think of the children playing in Unity Park, their laughter a testament to the promise of a better future, and he knew that it was. One evening, as he was leaving the park after a community event, he was approached by a young woman. She was holding the hand of a little boy who looked up at the mayor with wide, curious eyes. "Mayor Jackson," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "I just wanted to thank you. My son and I moved here a few months ago, and this park, it means so much to us. It's a place where we feel safe, where we feel welcome. Thank you for making that possible." The mayor felt a lump in his throat as he smiled at her. "Thank you for saying that," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "It means more than you know." As he watched them walk away, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was why he had fought so hard, why he had faced the criticism and the backlash. It was for people like them, for families who just wanted a place to belong, a place where they could build their lives and their dreams. In the end, that was what Unity Park was all about. It was more than just a park. It was a promise that they would continue to work for a city where everyone felt welcome, where everyone had a place. It was a promise that they would never stop striving for a better future, no matter how difficult the journey might be. As the mayor walked to his car, the sky darkening above him, he felt a sense of peace. The challenges would continue, the work would go on, but he knew that they were on the right path. They had come together in the face of adversity, and they had shown the world what was possible when people chose unity over division, hope over fear. And that, more than anything, was the legacy of Unity Park, a legacy of hope, of resilience, of a community that refused to be divided, a community that believed against all odds in the power of coming together. As he drove away, he took one last look at the park, its lights glowing softly in the evening dusk, and he knew in his heart that they would keep that promise. They would keep building, keep striving, keep hoping, because they were stronger together, and together there was nothing they couldn't achieve.